I'm trying to save as many Americans as possible, and so prices would go way up. We have a massive recession in this country with much higher inflation and much higher interest rates. So we're going to experience a economic collapse, the likes of which no living American has ever seen.
Peter Schiff just gave a serious warning. He says America's false prosperity is about to collapse. Why? Because we've been living off money we print, and now the world is turning away. Tariffs, inflation, and rising interest rates. It's all leading to something far worse than 2008. Let's hear what Peter has to say.
Well, the damage from the tariffs is going to be much worse than the damage to the markets. Trump does not understand, and nor do his economic advisors, the relationship that the U.S. currently has with the rest of the world. You see, for the past, 10, 20 years, we've really enjoyed a false prosperity. We never really had any legitimate economic growth, especially since the 2008 financial crisis. We've basically been living off the charity of the rest of the world. We've lived above our means because the rest of the world has enabled that. And the way the process works is we create money. The Fed creates money through QE or other programs that it has to fund massive deficit spending on the part of the government. And Americans take the money that the Fed creates and they go shopping in places like China. And we buy all sorts of goods that we did not produce and that we don't have the capacity to produce. And we take all that inflation, which is the newly created money, and we just basically send that out to other countries like China, and they ship us all their goods. And without China and other countries shipping us their goods, we would just be stuck with all the inflation. And so prices would go way up and we would have a much lower standard of living because there's not that much to buy. But because foreigners subsidize us by sending us all their stuff in exchange for the money we print, we get to enjoy a higher living standard than we otherwise would have. And foreigners take the dollars that we give them and they buy our stocks and they buy our bonds. And this has pushed up the stock market, and so we feel richer as foreigners buy into our market. And interest rates are artificially low as foreigners are buying our treasury bonds and other, debt instruments. And so what Donald Trump is doing is ending all that. He's basically telling foreigners, we don't want you to subsidize our economy anymore. We want these trade deficits to go away. The forces that he's set in motion is reversing all of that. So the American standard of living is going to collapse because if the goods that foreigners were providing no longer come in because the tariffs have made them so expensive that Americans can't afford to buy them, then inflation goes through the roof here because all of our money is stuck here. We don't have that release valve anymore. We can't ship our money out of the country and import all this stuff. The stuff stays out and the money stays in. So prices go way up and stock prices go way down because not only are foreigners not buying any more stock in the U.S., they're taking their money out of U.S. stocks, out of U.S. bonds to invest back in their own markets. So our stock market bubble deflates. And because foreigners are no longer buying our bonds, interest rates go way up. So we have a massive recession in this country with much higher inflation and much higher interest rates. So we're going to experience a economic collapse, the likes of which no living American has ever seen. This is going to be a financial crisis much worse than 2008. It is a day of reckoning for years and years of living beyond our means. And it's not just stagflation. It is going to be an inflationary depression. Well, yeah, we've been on the Titanic for a long time. It just took a while to hit the iceberg. But we're going down. But that quote is in reference to my investment strategies. I'm trying to save as many Americans as possible from going broke. And, year to date, gold mining stocks are up better than 50%. So as the U.S. is in a bear market and, the NASDAQ and the Russell 2000 are in bear market territory, down more than 20%. In fact, at its lows, the Russell 2000 was down 30%, and it's going much lower. Gold stocks are up 50%, but they could double or triple just between now and the end of the year. And then I think they're going much higher than that In fact, I just came out with a new special report that you can get at Europac.com, the best way to buy gold. And it's not buying physical gold. Even though gold is up $112 an ounce today, today is the biggest one-day gain in the history of gold. And, we had a couple of $100 days last week. So, I mean, this is unprecedented. I've never seen this happen, although I've been predicting for years that we would start to see this. I didn't realize that we were going to prick our own bubble. I always assumed that the dollar crisis would start externally. Instead, we did it to ourselves. But the dollar is getting killed, gold is going up, but Americans can protect themselves by buying these gold stocks right now, because I think, they could go up 5, 10 times or more over the next few years. But also it's important to recognize U.S. stocks and bonds are going way down because our markets have been propped up by foreigners recycling their trade surpluses into our financial markets. So as the air comes out of this bubble, you got to get out of U.S. stocks and bonds because they're going way down. And of course, you got to get out of crypto as well. That's another bubble that's been supported by cheap money and speculation. And the whole Bitcoin is digital gold narrative is blowing up because it's not digital gold. If it was digital gold, it would be going up like gold is. It's going in the opposite direction because it's just digital risk. And a lot of people who were fooled into buying Bitcoin last year because they thought it was a better form of gold are in for a rude awakening because they're going to realize they gave up their gold for nothing. Basically like a handful of magic beans, except, there's not going to be a beanstalk going up to a cloud with a giant. The U.S. by far will suffer the most. We're in the most vulnerable position. We're the country that completely depends on imports. So we will have the most pain. The rest of the world will go through some growing pain as it transitions away from the U.S. market, but then there'll be a boom outside the United States because, when the world stops trading with the United States, it's a net positive. We have such huge deficits. So we deprive the world of consumer goods that otherwise could be consumed by non-Americans. And the world is investing their savings in our country, and they could be investing those savings in their own countries. So when they stop financing our deficits and supplying our economy with goods we can't afford, I think the rest of the world is going to be better off. But yes, I mean, there will be some bumps along the road because, people have been doing this for a long time. And so they have to get new customers for their goods. And that may mean different trade routes and things like that and different relationships. But in the end, the world is going to emerge in a much better place because it's going to be liberated from the burden of having to subsidize the American economy. On the other hand, America is going to be relieved of that subsidy. And so we're going to experience a protracted decline in our living standards, and we're going to have to go back to work as a nation. We're going to have to stop spending, stop buying stuff, stop borrowing money, massively shrink our government, so that we can save again and invest and rebuild the factories that no longer exist. So it's a rough road ahead. The problem is nobody is prepared to travel it. Trump needs to veto the bill that's coming through Congress to increase the national debt by $5 trillion and crank up the deficits even beyond what we had under Biden. So Trump needs to veto that and go back to the drawing board with real substantive cuts to government spending, including defense and entitlements like Social Security, Medicare, Obamacare, all that stuff, government pensions, farm subsidies, corporate welfare. We need to really gut government spending. And then we need even more deregulation, especially when it comes to the labor markets and a lot of these laws that make hiring so uneconomical in the United States. And we need interest rates to go up. We need much higher interest rates so we can encourage Americans to save money instead of spending it, so that those savings can be used to build the factories and the supply chains and the infrastructure we need to actually produce the stuff that we're not going to be able to afford to import. But in order to do that, then we have to have much lower stock prices, much lower bond prices, and we're probably going to have to endure a financial crisis where a lot of our banks fail and a lot of depositors lose money. So there is a huge day of reckoning that we need to deal with in order to solve the problem. The alternative is that we try to blow the air back in the bubble. Trump tries to say, hey, I was just kidding. It was all an April Fool's joke. And he has to start kissing everybody else's ass. Instead of pretending that all the foreign leaders are calling him up, kissing his ass, Trump has got to start kissing some ass all over the world to try to get them to come back to just propping our economy up again. Well, Trump is getting a lot of horrible advice from Navarro and Lutnick, but he's also getting bad advice from Bessent. I mean, I hear a lot of the nonsense that he says. And, just the other day, he says that Trump is holding a royal flush and China's got a pair of deuces, right? He's got the game all wrong. Trump's got nothing. He's drawing dead to an inside straight, and China's got the nut. They have all the cards because they are the surplus nation. They have the factories. They have the infrastructure. They have the supply chain, and they have the savings. They have all the important stuff. We've got nothing. We've just got Americans that want to buy stuff but don't make anything. And the only reason we can buy stuff is because the world wants our dollars that we create out of thin air, that are nothing. And so if China and the rest of the world don't want our dollars anymore, then we're done. They still have all their factories. They can produce all their stuff. They don't need us to consume it. There are 1 billion people in China who are happy to consume what Americans can't afford. And not just in China. The Europeans are now considerably richer than they were on Liberation Day because the euro has gone way up. So Europeans now have been enriched. They can afford to buy more Chinese products. People in South America, South American farmers are about to earn a lot of money selling the Chinese soybeans that they're no longer buying from us. And so as China trades with other countries, the people in those countries will then be able to buy the goods that Americans can no longer afford. So we have got the losing hand, not China. And the fact that Scott Bessent doesn't understand this, and he is the Secretary of the Treasury, we are on the verge of a much worse financial crisis than 2008. And I will remind you that on the precipice of that crisis, neither the chairman of the Federal Reserve nor the Secretary of the Treasury had any idea it was about to happen. Yet I was out there warning as loud as I could exactly what was going to happen.
If Peter's right, we're heading into a financial storm like never before. Stay informed, stay prepared. Hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss what's coming next.